A very warm welcome to the World Economic Forum DWTV debate coming to you from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. I'm Amrita Cheema. We'll be looking at sport, going for gold, goals and growth. Now the 2014 World Cup is going to be held here in Brazil, and 2 years later the Olympics will be held in South America for the first time ever here in the city, Rio de Janeiro. How can and how will Brazil leverage sport to spur economic growth and social progress? To discuss this, we have a very interesting panel for you. Most of them have some indirect or direct link with sport, starting with the Right Honourable Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of Britain, currently the representative of the UN Peace Quartet in the Middle East. On my left, we have Renato Villela, who's the Finance Secretary of the State of Rio de Janeiro. And then we have someone who's directly linked with football. That's Juergen Griesbeck. He's the founder and CEO of Streetfootballworld. And he's also been recognized as a social entrepreneur by the Schwab Foundation. Getting now to Charlie Denson. He's the president of the Nike brand, United States of America. And then we're very pleased to have Mark Penn, who's come here from Burson-Marsteller, an international public relations company. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. Now, starting with you, Mr. Blair, the next big sporting event is going to be the London Olympics next year. How do you assess the economic impact of these big sporting events?
I think I think the economic impact today is massive, because the thing about sport now is that it's about so much more than sport. Okay, so when we won the bid for the London Olympics, it was a vast thing for the whole country. And these events now, when Rio won the bid for the 2016 Olympics, it was a huge national event, and that's precisely because people know it has an impact far beyond just the 3 weeks of the games. And you know, it's both an enormous opportunity, but of course it's a great challenge as well. Because you've not just got to put on the games, but what is interesting when you analyze past games and sporting events, some have worked and some haven't. Right? So you've got to be sure that this is something that is, yes, it's a tremendous opportunity, which is why people compete so fiercely to host the World Cup in football or the Olympic Games. Or I just come from Colombia, where they're hosting the under-20 football, and that's, you know, under-20 football, but it's still a major thing for the country. So in London, for example, for the 2012 Olympics, you know, there's a massive investment in infrastructure. A whole part of London City that has been pretty desolate for many, many years is now to be regenerated. You've got jobs in construction and housing and so on. Then, of course, during the period of the games, of course, you've got a whole lot more money coming in. And then after the games, you hopefully, I mean, we've set a task in London for, you know, tens of thousands of jobs to come permanently out of the Olympics, plus investment. And we wanted also to use the Olympics, and we'll do so next year, to say, here's something about London that maybe, you know, you don't simply get from a tourist brochure. But when that happens, people will ask a lot of tough questions to see whether what you're saying about your country is then matched by the reality of what they find. So, you know, yes, it's an enormous opportunity economically, but you've got to get it right, and it's possible to get it wrong.
Now, we've heard a lot about the potential benefits and the potential challenges that lie ahead. But I have to tell you, there's a whole body of academic work and research on the impact of mega sporting events. And the results that have come out from this research works is quite sobering. They tend to indicate that there is a tendency to vastly inflate the benefits of holding these mega sporting events and to underestimate what they're going to cost. Now, taking that into view, Mr. Villela, what do you see as the potential risks for you in hosting these mega events?
Well, first, most of those studies, they try, or they tend to focus on the games themselves as a business, an enclosed business that takes 3 weeks or 1 or 4 weeks, and then they do some kind of simple balance sheet and see, well, what comes out and it gets in. And that's not the idea. The idea is that, as it was pointed out for almost everybody here now today, it's a broader point. I mean, look at happened, as Mr. Blair said, to Barcelona.
But that's one of the very few Olympics which are regarded as a benchmark as to how a mega sporting event can be part of a larger national and economic agenda.
Yes.
Now, and that is one of the very few examples. You've also had other examples, take Montreal, a financial disaster for the city. You look at various other countries where stadiums are lying in disrepair, where in Athens, for example, the people are still paying enhanced taxes for what the country had to pay for the Olympics. Mm-hmm. The question really is, now, in London, you've already lost the cost argument. The Olympics were meant to cost about over 4 billion, and now they're costing over 9 billion. But is it, in the end, worth it?
Yeah.
Why?
Because, I mean, look, first of all, you're absolutely right in saying there are examples of games that have done better than others, but that's clear. But I totally agree with what the Minister's just been saying. The fact is, you can look at this in a very narrow way, but there is a reason why people compete fiercely for these bids today. And actually, just coming from Colombia, I think it was in the 1980s that Colombia actually won the World Cup bid and then said they weren't going to have it. Right. That is not looked back on as a great decision in today's terms. And you see, I think the thing about sport is and this is maybe, with respect to the analysts, where sometimes even the politicians can see this a little clearer than them. It's the link of the different things today. I mean, my foundation is about getting people to become officials for grassroots sport, right? Because what we lack are often coaches, referees, people who are going to be officials, and so on. Now, here's the thing. For me, sport is a mainstream policy for government because it is a great healthcare policy, it's a great anti-crime policy, it's a great social responsibility policy, it's a great community policy.
But Mr. Blair, you still did have trouble in the London Olympics to get enough private sector funding. The Olympic Village was supposed to be funded entirely privately, but the public sector funds had to be pitched in. For the Olympic Stadium, in the end, you were only able to get one bidder. How difficult then, Charlie, is it for the private sector to get in?
Yeah, correct you on that, actually, because we have got several £billion worth of private sector money into this. And in some areas, we've actually done better, for example, on sponsorship and so on, than we anticipated. And by the way, on the cost, these costs, you can go through the costs in a number of different ways, but it always all depends on what you include in the cost. So it's not the comparison actually between the 4 and the 9 billion is not quite correct. But I mean, essentially, yeah, you're always going to have huge challenges in relation to cost. But I honestly don't think even in these economic times, if I had the decision, did you go in 2005 for the Olympics? If you could have the time again, would you do it? For sure.
Right. Now, Juergen, we're looking at, this whole thing about exclusivity. Because of the way these events are organized by FIFA and by the IOC, you have these exclusion zones where local business is not able to profit, vendors are squeezed out. How do you see that when you were at South Africa? What impact did these events really have on local business around that area? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an area where we are learning because it's really new to talk about social legacy around. I think we talked a long time about green, and now it's, let's say, the final bottom line. Yeah. Now that's coming to the mega events is now the social legacy. And I think this challenges now the term of successful of a mega event because it's now a new element that has to be measured against, which is the social legacy of these mega events, if we talk about successful. In terms of South Africa, I don't know if I mentioned, we worked in a strategic alliance with FIFA, and with us for the first time ever, included the social element into the World Cup, which was then a Football for Hope festival and the development of, let's say, an improvement of the working conditions of 20 local organizations across Africa, which is still being developed after the World Cup. So it's precisely this after the World Cup that's very important to us. During the World Cup, it's a very big tension between obviously we want to, on the advocacy level, it is a huge achievement to have the social agenda included in these mega events. If you look at what our ambition would be, obviously long-term, sustainable, maximum impact. But this then conflicts with what you mentioned, exclusivity. It's by nature, it can't be maximum impact in terms of social legacy if you reduce the number of people who can participate. So I think we have to find bridges to, at least in the social agenda, that shouldn't affect, let's say, the sponsorship and things, because it's a hard, tough thing to talk about. Right. But we have to think in new paradigms, as I said before.
One of the people who are actually building bridges is your company, Charlie. You've set up, you're supporting various organizations and initiatives, and one of them is Sport for Social Change Network in Brazil itself. Now, how important is this kind of activity for your branding, and should companies who introduce corporate social responsibility, which smacks a bit of tokenism, actually make it a part of corporate strategy, what I would describe as social solidarity? You gain greatly in terms of commerce, but that there is companies who are involved here should display a certain amount of social solidarity?
Well, I guess I'd make 2 points. I think, one, I think that the definition of what a successful mega event is today is evolving, and I think there's some paradigm shifts going on. And I think whether it's through the economic sector, whether it's through the social sector, the great thing from our perspective is everybody wants to be involved. And I think everybody wants to be involved because the entire world watches. And so they become great platforms for a lot of things, both positive and negative. I think, from a consumer standpoint, if having a social agenda is a token part of your corporate strategy, you will fail. I think in today's world of transparency, it no longer is an option to embrace a social agenda as a token of something that you do kind of off to the side. I think one of the things that we've spent a lot of time talking about over the last 10 years is how you actually build some of this into the actual business proposition itself. And I think the thing that drives that is the consumer. Right. And when the consumer cares, then as a brand and as a business, you have to address it. That's so right. It's that simple. And I think today the consumer does care.
Now, you talked a lot about the opportunities, Mr. Villela. Now, you have opportunities in infrastructure, in services, in deadlines and guidelines for security and reaching certain targets. How do you ensure that the growth which may result from these mega sporting events is a sustained growth, which goes beyond the events themselves, and also it's more inclusive and widespread, that not just certain areas, certain cities, certain sectors profit, but is distributed more widely within the country?
Well, one key issue, or one key idea of not only the Brazilian government, but also the state and municipal government, is that what we are doing for the Olympics or for the World Cup is not only focused on the venue of the games and in the surroundings. For instance, the state is investing hugely in a mass transportation system that will, of course, help the movement during the games, but it's mostly something that the city, the metropolitan area needs. For instance, you see, one of the most striking features of Rio is the favelas. And why do the favela exist? Because lack of transportation. People have to live near the places of work. So they tend to go to the slopes of the hills, close to the center of the city, and then they accumulate over there. Because Rio, until now, did not have a good and a fast transportation system. We are doing that. We are improving our metropolitan railway system. We are building new subway lines and even bus transportation. It's going to be there. It's going to last. It's going to increase a lot the mobility of the Rio's workforce.
Really, in the end, Mark, isn't what really sticks in people's mind is the reality, because the country is going to be in the spotlight. It's the reality in the ground, whether it's kind of security, whether it's corruption, whether it's red tape, whether it's bureaucracy. Do you think Brazil can actually win the PR war, given that you have hosts of journalists who are actually very closely watching developments here?
Expectations are low, and in fact, a little secret in our business is keep them low. Keep them as low as possible. Don't overhype the Olympics before they happen, right? So that everyone goes, wow, I wasn't sure, but it's amazing what they pulled off. And I think there's a very good run up here. It's very important, I think, as the minister pointed out, these measures, you're going to have to not just do them, you are going to have to tell people about them. Because at the end of the day, reality and perception have to meet somewhere. And let's not leave it to journalists to pick out one person somewhere, who had a bad hot dog as representative of the Olympics. And we're in a world where the smallest of things can become the biggest of stories. So tell the biggest of stories, along with the notion that it's not just about the sports, it's about the people, it's about the enthusiasm, it's about the national character, it's about the can-do spirit, it's about meeting a bar that people didn't think can be met. I think all of those things, look, most government programs run over budget. So it's not surprised that the Olympics or World Cup might run over budget. But part of the underestimation is that it's not just about the hard assets of the transportation system, but the soft assets, about the image, the branding, and the enthusiasm that these games and mega events create, whether they're royal weddings or sports events. And probably, I think, sporting events can say much more about the national character than even weddings.
Now, talking about, we've kind of not talked much about the gold and goals aspect of this debate. Tony Blair, one of the legacies which the London Olympics wants to achieve is to inspire a whole new generation of interest in sports activities. How important do you think are these events in actually inspiring people to take part in sport, get involved in sport, which, as we heard, is kind of a lifestyle issue, but also a health issue?
Yeah, it's obviously huge because you've got a tremendous focus, not just for the weeks of the Games, the Olympics and the Paralympics, but also in the run-up. So we're already using the London Olympics to try to change completely the way we do sport at a local level. And, I think the toughest thing for governments today, in a way, is to understand how fast the world's changing and how they've got to keep up with that change. And the reason why I think the sport is so important, I was saying before we came on here that, what I found in government was that, because I was always passionate about sport and its importance, and I found, when you were doing these big meetings in Downing Street about policy, and I would say, now I want to talk about sport in school, and all the sort of senior guys would get out their pads and start doodling around and think of what other meetings they were about to have, because sport was they didn't regard it as essential and mainstream. And my point is very simple: it is mainstream today, and that's not just for the reasons that Mark is giving. And by the way, he's absolutely right about that. I mean, the reputational impact of this is enormous. I mean, South Africa, for example, definitely gained out of it. Now, by the way, it could have not have gained out of it. Germany too. But that was a huge thing. In fact, I think actually that Germany in the World Cup and the attitude even within Germany and outside to Germany, I think, is a really interesting example of this. So, of course the reputation matters, but in terms of health, lifestyle, you can use the Olympics or the World Cup to get to a whole new level of the sense of importance of sport to a country and to what it's trying to achieve.
I think that's a very good time to actually, we have to open the floor to the question, but if you want to make a quick comment.
One of integral parts of our pacification of slum areas is the sports. Once we get the pacification in place, we get into with the schools, with health centers, but with swimming pools, soccer courts, tennis courts, and people to teach them, along with the NGOs that already work in the areas. And then one of the most successful tools for settling up or settling down the spirits there are the sports, and not only soccer.
We will now throw this debate open to the floor. So if any of you would like to ask questions, if you raise your hand, introduce yourself, and then if it's a comment, keep it brief. If it's a question, also keep it brief, but do address it to someone on the panel, if you wish.
My question is that we've seen here in Brazil that 2014 is really a marker for people's individuals, their passions, their dreams, right? How they can better themselves, their communities, their families. You've talked a lot about engines of change being these really large institutions, right? Governments, thinking about infrastructure, right? Mr. Blair, you mentioned Downing Street, right? The high street mentality. How can you think about Main Street really as an engine for change and individuals' participation in their passions instead of really thinking about it from the top down?
Just looking at it, going back to the paradigm shift I was talking about, not looking at a civil society solely as a beneficiary potentially of the mega event, but as part of the value chain of the mega event, and include them as a serious element for the success of the World Cup or the Olympic Games. And if we just look at the numbers, you mentioned 9 billion, and this is more or less the number of a mega event. If we would intelligently make 9.1 billion out of it and interweave that in public policy for the years after, and kind of recycle that investment then over the years, I think it makes no difference on the investment, but it makes a huge difference on social legacy.
Mr. Villela?
As you know, as you probably know, Rio is responsible for 85% of oil and gas production in Brazil. So we get part of our budget come from oil revenues. And a significant part of those revenues are earmarked to investments on environments. So we are very active on that, and of course we are taking advantage of the Olympics to go further.
How much do you think that the longer term benefits, particularly in terms of public participation in sport, depend on actual success in terms of medals and goals, success on the sporting field? So I think in Britain it seems that participation, particularly in some less well-known sports, has been very dependent on high-profile success from British athletes in those sports.
Mr. Blair, you could make a brief comment, and perhaps Charlie, you could add to that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think you've got to be realistic about this. Yes, it does matter. But I think that there's, my reflection on this, just also in respect to the other question, is that I think what governments can do is that they can create a framework, obviously, in which you encourage grassroots sport and which you provide the opportunity for people. But then the rest is up to them. And actually what happens is that if you give them that opportunity, my general experience is they take it. So I think often for people looking at this, and this is why it's such an important event, because it shows you the way the modern world works. The truth is people do look and get affected by what they see. How easy is it to participate? And if they see, for example, with Britain and cycling, or rowing, they see that the successful role models out there, it makes a difference. I mean, why is that surprising to us? It's the way human nature works, and it's the way the modern world works. So yes, I think it does matter, but I think the interesting thing is that you can get it both ways round. In other words, I also think that when you have the Olympics, because it excites people, you can actually then start to upgrade your success actually within the sports. And if you look at, for example, South Korea as a result of the Seoul Olympics, they started to do a lot better in sport more generally. So I think, you know, yeah, of course it makes a difference, but there's lots of things that you can do in order to encourage that and then make use of it.
And I can only validate, we build our entire business around that success. So it's it is important, and I hope it stays that way. But I think what it is too, it's an amplification of, you know, of a great moment, and whether, you know, the home team gets to experience it and it enhances it locally, or there's another world record set, you know, an extraordinary performance by, you know, by the human race, and that is celebrated as well. So I think that it's important. I think the competition is important, but it's really how it's amplified is where you see the biggest benefits.
As we heard, there have been a lot of interesting points which have been raised. Brazil is hosting these two major events in the coming years. It has huge opportunities for the country. These events will be used as a catalyst for long-term, sustainable economic growth and social progress. You were watching the World Economic Forum DWTV debate coming to you from Rio de Janeiro. I'm Amrita Cheema. It was great to have you with us. Bye for now.